this video is posted, we're gearing up for the semifinals of the IIHF World Junior Championship of hockey. It's a hockey tournament. So if you're not familiar with the tournament, it's basically the biggest under-20s international hockey tournament in the world. And in the big hockey countries, it does get a lot of buzz, at least here in Canada it does. So let me just take this moment to boast about the fact that Canada holds the most titles of the tournament with 20 gold medals since 1977, but we'll get into that history. And we're also the reigning champs when I'm recording this. Yes, sir. So, sure, only 8 countries have ever medaled in this tournament, but that's besides the point. And it is a big deal, and it has been historically, because with NHL players not being able to participate in the Winter Olympics, this is sort of a rare occasion where you get to see the best players from your country playing together, at least the under-20s. There are world championships proper, but those happen usually during the Stanley Cup playoffs or the lead up to the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, often the best players are unavailable because they're busy trying to win the Stanley Cup. So that this, to me anyway, this tournament feels bigger than the over 20s World Championship, just the World Championship of hockey. And so back during the Cold War, the same rules held true. For a while in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were allowed to, I'm not an NHL player. NHL players were allowed to participate in the Winter Olympics, but it's the NHL. They don't like to share the love. So it's not true anymore. But during the Cold War, NHL players were not allowed in the Olympics, the World Championships. So, the tournament was an opportunity to watch the best Western players face off against the best players from the Soviet Union. We often talk about the miracle on ice at the 1980 Olympics, America versus Russia, as sort of the height of the Cold War rivalry on the ice. But no contemporary NHL players were on those teams, which I think is interesting. But all this to say that in the comments of a previous video, Martin, I want to make sure that was clear, suggested the punch-up in Piestany, for a video topic. And this is a story from the 1987 World Juniors. I'm just going to call them the Juniors or the World Juniors from now on. I'm referring to the tournament. So thank you very much, Martin. Why is it hard to say your name soft-spoken? I don't know. Thank you for your suggestion. Your timing is perfect. So let's get into it. And maybe we'll start with a little bit more background into the Cold War era in international hockey, and specifically sort of the tensions that had existed, in the decades prior to 87, that, increased the tension between the two teams. And I shouldn't forget that I have a hockey skate today to make sounds with. I'm not sure how this will go, but if it's not too distracting, I'll give it a go. Maybe tapping is gonna be the way to go. Maybe I can. Should I take the blade out? Or is that a bad idea? Let's get into the story. So, from 1963 to 1983, the Soviets won 17 World Championship titles. So that proper World Championship that that happens in the spring, early summer kind of thing. So, 17 World Championships in 21 years. And of course, political tensions were up at the time, which couldn't have helped. But during that period, Canada kept accusing the Soviets of using professional hockey players in what was supposed to be an amateur tournament, especially in the early days, like in the 60s. So eventually, Canada boycotted all World Championships and Olympic hockey tournaments between 1970 and 1976. But in 1972, there was the Summit Series, which was an 8-game series between Soviet All-Star team and Canada's NHL All-Stars, so Canadian All-Stars basically. And Canada won that series 4-3-1. So 4 wins to Canada, 3 wins to the Soviets, and 1 tie. Now, the juniors, they were created, like I said, in 1977. And in the beginning, it was dominated by the Soviet Union. They actually won gold for the first 4 years running. Then in 1982, Canada, I was going to say fielded, but I don't think that's the right term. Canada sent its first proper junior national team. Until that point, until 1982, they were kind of relying on the Canadian Hockey League to put together a team. And then the Canadians won that tournament in 82. So all of a sudden, the Soviets had a real competitor in this newish tournament. In 1983, the Soviet Union won. In 84, it was the Soviets. In 85, it was Canada. And in 86, it was the Soviets. So, the 1987 juniors come along. And this is the year of the brawl. I just realized that I don't think anywhere in my intro did I mention that the topic of the video, the punch-up in Piestany, is a big brawl, essentially, that happened in this tournament. But so, we're getting into that story now. So, that year, the tournament, the juniors were a round-robin tournament, which, if you're more familiar with soccer, for example, it's kind of like a group stage, right? It's not a knockout tournament. It's a tournament where the teams with the top 3 records from playing against all the other teams, they get gold, silver, and bronze. And Canada and the Soviet Union were scheduled to play play the last game of the tournament, the organizers sort of assumed that at least one of those two countries would be competing for the gold medal, which I think is, fair assumption given the history of the tournament. And so it would add some excitement to have those teams play last. Finland, who were strong by the way, they had won 3 silver medals in the tournament at that point. They had already finished their schedule, and they had a record of 5-1-1. So they were sort of in the lead for the gold medal, depending on how this Canada-Soviet Union game went. So Canada were going into this last game to play against the Soviet Union on a 4-1-1 record. So mathematically, I'm kind of forgetting about the skate. Mathematically, Canada was guaranteed at least the bronze medal in the tournament. The team in the silver medal position as things stood was another team that had already finished the schedule, and that was, at the time, Czechoslovakia, which was the host nation. Piestany is in modern-day Slovakia. And Czechoslovakia was the only team that had beat Canada. So they had a 5-2-2 record. So where did that put us? Well, basically going into this game, a tie between the Canadians and the Soviets would not change the medal standings. So it would be Finland, Czechoslovakia in silver, and Canada with bronze. However, a Canadian win against the Soviets would guarantee Canada at least a silver medal. The gold would have depended on sort of like goal difference and then goals scored between Canada and Finland. So basically, if Canada won by 5 goals or more, they would win the gold medal. But don't worry about remembering those numbers, because as you will find out, they didn't come to matter in the end. Now, for what it's worth, the Soviet Union, they were entering the game on a 2-3-1 record. So they were already sort of eliminated from medal contention. But Canada was a bit of a rival, and so they were still playing to, sort of challenge Canada and not let them get the gold or the silver. So it's January 4th, 1987. As I said, we are in Piestany, Czechoslovakia, and the referee was Hans Roning. He was from Norway, and he was actually chosen for the perceived, neutrality of his position. That being said, though, he didn't have much experience officiating at the international level. In fact, a representative for Canada, when he found out that Hans was going to be officiating, he tried to get the IIHF to change the assignments. earlier in the tournament, in a match between Canada and the United States, Hans had officiated and a brawl had broken out during the pregame warm-ups, and officials were not on the ice at the time, but they decided to, Hans decided to eject one player at random from each team for the brawl even happening. In case you don't know, in international hockey, any player who gets into a fight is basically ejected from the remainder of the tournament. So he had made some questionable decisions, but the IIHF wouldn't budge, and Hans remained on assignment. I was hoping it would be a smoother removal, and I just looked at the blade and I thought, nope, I'm too accident prone for this. The cover is going right back on. And the fact that they even let me purchase these is a testament to consumer rights. Moving on. Where was I? Hans was officiating. So let's get into the game, right? Right off of the opening face-off, a Soviet player elbows a Canadian player. The Canadian responds by cross-checking the Soviet player. No penalty is given. 5 minutes in, Canada gets the first goal of the game, and the player who scored that goal, Fleury, not my Fleury, different Fleury, he did a machine gun celebration at the Soviet bench, which was totally unnecessary and disrespectful. But the first period just kept going that way. Both teams were constantly slashing their opponents. The referees, the officials were just letting that tension build and not doing anything about it. And ultimately, the period ended 3-1 for Canada. And then by the halfway point of the second period, both teams had scored again, and it was 4-2. A 4-2 lead for Canada. Now, I'll put the skate down for the meat of this topic of this video. Okay. So, with 6 minutes and 7 seconds left in the second period, after a face-off, two opposing players start fighting. Then another Soviet player, Pavel Kostichkin, he sort of sees an opportunity to get back at Fleury for that earlier celebration and probably a bunch of other infractions that weren't called. So he goes in with a two-handed slash on Fleury, which leads to another fight between them, and before you know it, there is a line brawl involving all of the skaters on the ice for both teams. There's one player for Canada who tried to abstain from fighting. He sat on the bench, and he was sort of told by the coach, no, you get on the ice. And unfortunately for him, he sort of was not ostracized, but he drew a big bullseye on his back from his own teammates for doing that, because they saw it as some of these guys were getting ganged up on, and he was just sitting on the bench not attempting to protect them or fight for them. So that in the following years became a big issue for that one player. Like I said, two players had ganged up on one Canadian, Stéphane Roy. Another player, I think it was a Soviet, broke a Canadian's nose with a headbutt. Everyone was finding a dancing partner, and there was at least a dozen fights happening on the ice at once. Meanwhile, Hans, the referee, and his boys, they can't get the situation under control. Kind of, echoing the malice at the palace that we talked about in our previous video. Look at that. I talk about hockey and all of a sudden I sound super Canadian. I went in with a full boat there. But yeah, Hans and his boys can't get the situation under control, so they are ordered by the Czechoslovakian officials to just get off the ice. So they leave the ice, and in one of the more memorable moments of the brawl, the tournament officials decided that the move was to turn off the lights in the arena. So at one point, everything goes dark, but I guess at this point we're just fighting in the dark now. It didn't help anything. And I can't imagine that happening today. It just seems like such a liability. But, meanwhile, the crowd is booing and chanting, "We want hockey, we want hockey." Like, if you're watching this video, but you don't watch hockey necessarily, hockey is part of, fighting is part of hockey culture for sure, but not on this level. Like, that's not what hockey is about. No one wants to see that. People just wanted to see this game play out. But the brawl goes on, some sources say 20 minutes. I haven't seen, video proof of that, and I certainly wasn't around in January of 1987, but, you can tell from the broadcast that it was at least a good 10 minutes, basically until the players just don't have the energy for it anymore. And by the time the fights had finally broken up, the Canadians were off the ice, the IIHF declared the game null and void. So what do we do about this? Well, the IIHF held an emergency meeting in the arena at that point to decide how to handle the incident. And at the meeting, each team had a delegate to represent it. And then what eventually happened is that the delegates voted 7-1. Let me pick this back up and try to make some sounds out of it. The delegates voted 7-1 in favor of ejecting both teams from the tournament. The only vote against was obviously Canada. And of course I'm biased, but Finland, Czechoslovakia, and Sweden all had, all stood to gain a medal position by voting the two teams out. Just saying. And the Soviets had nothing. The Soviets voted to eject the teams because they had nothing to lose. And they could prevent the Canadians from getting a medal by voting to eject them. So later on, the IIHF voted to suspend all the players from both teams from international events for 18 months. that was later cut down to 6 months, I think. So a lot of those players came back to play the following year, but the coaches were banned for 3 years. The organization also considered banning both teams, the Soviet Union and the Canadians, from competing in the following tournament in 1988 as sort of further punishment. But the next year's tournament was scheduled to take place in the Soviet Union. So that's a problem. And at the time, Canada was the only country that provided media revenue that, aired the tournament. So that was squashed pretty quickly. They didn't want to lose first of all, their host country, and then also a big chunk of their revenue. My hair's all over the place today. So, the next year, 1988, was business as usual. Canada won gold, and the Soviets got silver. But in case it wasn't clear, the Canadians did get ejected from the 87 tournament. So even though they were guaranteed at least a bronze medal going into that game, they were disqualified essentially from the tournament. And that is the story of the punch-up in Piestany. So thank you so much to Martin for dropping the suggestion in the comments. I feel like I owe the hockey skate like a proper video, because I feel like we could make some good sounds with this. I just got distracted with the story, so this will make another appearance soon, I'm sure. But on that note, that should have been the transition to say goodbye. I should have just slowly faded away off screen. On that note, though, guys, I see that my camera's about to stop recording, so I'm gonna say bye for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Oh, it's January 1st, isn't it?